You guys look ready. So my name is Bob Shapiro. Most of you spoke to me on the phone, lots of emails. We just met. I remembered how to tie a tie. It took a little while. Good to have you all here. And this is the first in what is going to be a series of panel discussions on the press, the police, and the public. I can tell you that the next one is going to be, I think the 21st is a Thursday of next month, October, in Newark, and it will be carried live on WBGO. But we're starting here at Mount Laurel, and Melanie Burney really helped organize this whole thing, and Steve Lubetkin, who's doing all the Vimeo in the back. So, this all emerged from a working group that you may hear about that the Attorney General convened August a year ago, 2020, after a reporter for the Asbury Park Press was arrested during a protest. He was released the next day. Police say he wasn't well identified. I'm with New Jersey Society of Professional Journalists. We may not agree, but we're not going to litigate that tonight. In fact, I should mention there are several sponsors to this event. Rowan College at Burlington County, the New Jersey Society of Professional Journalists, the Keystone Pro chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists. You can look us up at spj.org, been around since 1909. The New Jersey, njspj.org, real easy. Our moderator is Kenneth Burns, P. Kenneth Burns in his byline. And I think I'm going to turn it over to him, and we'll have everybody, because of COVID, it's not quite so easy. We only have certain microphones. They're going to come up to the mic. They may re-identify themselves, but it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Bob. Hey, Bob.
90 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how it goes.
Okay. We have to get the important details out of the way. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, New Jersey Society of Professional Journalists, for allowing me to be the moderator tonight. This is my first time moderating for the New Jersey chapter. I'm a current member of the New Jersey chapter, and I'm a past vice president of the Maryland Pro chapter. So this is a real honor for me. As Bob alluded to, I'm just going to have everybody kind of wave and introduce themselves, so everyone will have a name to a face, and name title, nothing too serious. We'll start with the journalist and my colleague April.
Oh, okay. I'm April Saul. I write and photograph primarily for WHYY, sometimes New Jersey Spotlight and others, veteran of the Philadelphia Inquirer.
All right.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melanie Burney. I'm an education reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I previously was a general assignment reporter and a member of the editorial board, and I'm happy to be here.
All right.
I'm going to ask people to come up to the mic, either that mic, whichever mic you're comfortable. Sure. Okay.
Thanks for having me. I'm Blake Nelson. I cover police and prisons for the Star Ledger and NJ.com.
If we could pass a mic to, okay.
I'm Dr. Sacanti, and I am a criminal justice professor here at Rowan College at Burlington County.
I'm Joe Rizzo. I'm also a criminal justice professor here at Rowan College at Burlington County.
Okay. And our community leaders.
Good afternoon. My name is Tyrus Ballard. I'm the first vice president and political action chair of the Southern Burlington County branch of NAACP.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Marcus Sibley. I'm the president, Southern Burlington County NAACP. I'm also the statewide environmental and climate justice chairman, as well as the communications chair.
And this is the law enforcement side of the stage.
Good evening. I'm Tom Eicher. I'm a director of the Office of Public Integrity and Accountability with the Attorney General's Office, and I work with Bob and a number of other folks on the guidance that was put out this past spring.
Thank you. My name is Corey Jones. You can call me Safety Man. retired police officer. My goal is to keep you safe.
Good evening. My name is Bud Monahan, and I'm the chief of the Cherry Hill Police Department.
Richard Rivera, I'm a retired municipal police officer, and I'm currently a police practice consultant and expert witness in courts.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Pesch. I'm the Chief of Police in Bordentown Township.
All right, I believe that's everybody. We'll take questions from the audience at some point. Let's start here. This is a fairly recent incident. Certainly one that I know Melanie covered, and I covered the post-mortem thereafter. This is the incident that happened early part of July in Mount Laurel. You had a guy by the name of Edward Cagney Matthews, who went viral for a racist rant. He actually tried to attack his neighbor again, but there was a good Samaritan, a good neighbor that got between the neighbor and Ed Matthews. And a whole bunch of racial epithets thrown, and it ended with Edward Cagney Matthews giving out his address and telling everyone to come see him. They did, hundreds of them. It grabbed the attention of the nation, believe it or not, and it ended with Edward Cagney Matthews being taken to jail. He's still there for charges related to that video and another incident that came to light. In fact, it actually delayed his initial court appearance. Melanie, let me start with you. First, did I miss anything? And just a couple of tidbits about, this is really, I find this an interesting story because it's coming off of last year where we had the summer of reckoning as far as race relations. And then here we have this guy who seemingly terrorized his neighborhood for a long, long time.
Sure. So I think this felt different from the George Floyd protests because people felt empowered. And when he said, "Come see me," it really touched off a nerve. And people at the grassroots level organized. And I think that's what was so effective about that protest, is that it was just ordinary folks posted on social media, and people came in droves from all over. And it wasn't the residents as much as it was outsiders who felt outraged by what happened and felt the need to do something about it. I think you captured what happened. It said a lot about the power of social media and how police respond when something happens. And what I saw on the ground is that people wanted a response from the police department, and it was slow in coming. And the NAACP was there on the ground and was very effective in helping to manage some of that anger that was boiling over, and it could have ended a lot differently than it did.
Let's get the community aspect of this. Marcus or Tyrus, if someone could first pass a microphone to either Marcus or Tyrus, what was your vantage point?
Well, our vantage point was we saw what years of getting away with literal murder does. You see how people are emboldened when they literally feel like there is nothing that can happen to me.
Oh, hold on. Almost forgot. If you have phones, please put them on vibrate or black face off. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No problem. So it was essentially, the situation was this person, as we started to see the other videos, and we saw that this person said, no matter what you do, the police know me, and they're gonna believe me over you. And that absolutely impacted every action that this person had. So that's what fueled people. People were angry about the cockiness of knowing I'm terrorizing my neighbors and the police won't do anything. And as we started to do more digging, we learned that there was a lot of truth to that statement. There was a lot of reports, a lot of complaints, and the police didn't do anything. So it was a time of reckoning where people said, we've been marching for all this time. There has been no reform, and this whole time since the passing of George Floyd, there has been no police reform laws passed. So people are saying, what will it take for our lives to matter? If I'm getting discriminated at home, we're getting shot in the streets, we're getting shot while walking our dog, harassed, what is it gonna take? And waiting for someone else to do it hasn't been very effective. We need to show up and demand these things to happen ourselves.
I believe, Corey, you might have a unique perspective on this, representing the law enforcement.
Sure. Thank you for that. Again, my name is Corey Jones, retired law enforcement. I did work, in full disclosure, 25 years in the Mount Laurel Police Department. In reference to what you said, sir, he did have 20 previous convictions, criminal convictions. So the police were out there enforcing the law, getting evidence, prosecuting cases, and getting convictions. He also had 11 missed court dates and prior obstruction charges. So it's not like the police weren't out there trying. I personally was involved in the arrest of him over 20 years ago when I first got hired, and we would proffer what we could to the prosecutor's office or to the Attorney General's office to get either a conviction or an indictment. So I was out of the local law enforcement hands, but the officer who came up there that you see in the video, who says to him by name, "Go home, Cagney, I'll talk to you later," don't let that make you believe that he had law enforcement in his pocket, because I can categorically deny that 100%. There's not a law enforcement officer that I worked with that would ever purposely believe Mr. Matthews over any other person, let alone any resident.
Can we just speak to the just not the previous?
I'm talking about this exact incident. In that exact incident, Officer White walks up and says, "Go home, Cagney, the police are, I got the police. The police are gonna believe me." That's category.
There were 9 complaints over the course of 3 years.
Can we address the complaints from those residents? I don't care about his previous stuff. We know he's a lifelong criminal.
Yes.
I'm talking about the complaints from the residents where he lived, where nothing happened. Can you just address that? I don't care about before.
It's very difficult when when a resident will come to us without any evidence. If there's no evidence for us to prosecute a case, as much as we may not care for this individual, as much as we may believe that he did something wrong, we'll write the report. If we can sign a criminal complaint, we will sign a criminal complaint. If the judge, as in this case before the video came out, said no, do not arrest him, it wasn't the police fault. The law enforcement tried to arrest him. It was the judge who said no, you cannot arrest him. Then the video came out, which allowed more residents to bring more information, i.e. more evidence, which allowed us to put that charge on an indictment and then cause the judge to issue an indictment, issue an arrest warrant, and then cause us to go bring him to court. And when that was happening, these protesters were assaulting the police officers with rocks, bottles, and pepper spray. So it took all that additional evidence from the residents to cause that arrest.
So I just had to jump in really, really quickly.
Yes, sir.
Because one thing that we should not do for these impressionable young people is not be honest with them. These are our young future leaders sitting in these seats, and it's okay to be honest sometimes. Like when we make a mistake, we own up to that mistake and say, you know what, we didn't approach that right. Let's get back to the drawing board. To pretend like the police got this 100% correct, it's so wrong to me. It's blowing my mind that you're even doing this right now, because the reality is the tactical unit was on site. They didn't bring the tactical unit in to clear the crowd. They had the unit on the side. They allowed that scene to happen. And in the moment that Cagney was inside the police vehicle, that's when the crowd control came in and moved everybody out. So we can't sit up and pretend like the police weren't complicit in this. That's number one. Number two,
let me step in.
Wait a minute. To say that they were attacking the police with water bottles, like these were water bottles, and why? Why? Because people showed up to someone who called this man I mean, call this person the worst thing you can call a person, and then the police had a barricade in front of this person's house. So the optics were, they were protecting him. So when you sit up here and say, like, we're not anti-police, but the problem is when you don't take any ownership, you force people to become anti-police. It's okay to own some things sometime. It was 3 years of complaints and nothing happened. Like, there is no way that you can say that the police weren't complicit at all. Like, we're supposed to have relationships. We meet with the Attorney General's office. We meet with the different police departments. We have to have a relationship. We can't have relationships if people aren't going to even be the baseline honest. So did the protesters do things we don't like? Absolutely. Did we address it as Melanie spoke about? We absolutely did. But to say that the police were assaulted by water bottles and liquid when we get assaulted daily, come on, man. You got to do better than that.
I think that's a good place to put a pin on it and explains. I'm going to do something self-serving, but let me apologize in advance. This is exactly why I wanted to do this discussion, because there is some commonality between law enforcement, between community members and community leaders, and the press. And that commonality is we just don't trust each other. I mean, when you get down to it, in fact, I was going to do a whole spiel about I wanted a good conversation and I want everybody to respect each other because this is a journalism event and not a cable opinion news show. Because what happens when you turn on like Fox News or CNN, just a bunch of people yelling at each other and the poor anchor just trying to make sense of it all. But I think what I'm seeing, and if anybody wants to jump in, law enforcement sees it one way, the community sees it differently, and we as journalists, and Melanie and April, we could talk more generally about this, we see what we see. I mean, we're not making it up. That's giving us too much credit first and foremost. But we literally show up and try to find out the who, what, when, where, why, and how, the facts, and our own observations. And it's great that we have smartphones now because we could actually take a picture and show people we're not making it up. So let's deconstruct this, and we won't spend all night on Mount Laurel, but let's kind of deconstruct this. I'm sorry, your name? Chief. Okay, Chief, you're Pensgrove, right? No. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make two quick points.
Yeah.
And to something that Marcus said about the optics that the police show up, and I think this is important for young people to understand. We show up and it looked like we were guarding Mr. Cagney's house. Okay, I want to speak to that. So here in Burlington County, we have a mutual aid response team, okay, for mass demonstrations, crowd management, whatever. And that was something that the prosecutor's office and the Burlington County Chiefs Association, had the foresight to put together a couple years ago, not knowing that protests have become more widespread and more frequent now. So our role there is to preserve peace and order. That's it. You had people responding, it's mutual aid, so they're coming from all over the county. Bordentown sent 4 or 5 officers to that event. They have no idea who Mr. Cagney is. They've never met him, never dealt with him. They're just there to preserve peace and order. That's it. We're not taking sides. There are people that live there whose house could be affected if for some reason the protests turn violent. What if counter-protesters showed up that wanted to hurt the protesters? We're there to protect them as well. So I think it's important to realize that the mere presence of law enforcement on the scene, we're not taking any sides. We're certainly not there to protect or take the side of Mr. Cagney. We are there to protect him, in fact. We live in a nation of laws, and we're not going to allow people to go into other people's homes that haven't been convicted of a crime and pull them out, assault them, hurt them, whatever, destroy their property, which could have an effect on the whole neighborhood. So I just want to make that distinction. I think it's important. And these officers that are a part of this team, because we're talking about the press as well, they're specially trained on how to deal with the press, First Amendment rights, what the press's rights are at a protest. So we've made a concerted effort here in Burlington County to train our responders that are a part of this team to, number one, use the most restraint possible in dealing with protesters, be professional, be patient, and then be well trained and equipped to handle these situations. Yes, sir.
When I spoke with you on the phone, you also, because I want to direct it a little bit this way, you had some criticisms. We're talking about what happened, and of course, that's the job of the press to try to inform the public as to what happened. You had some questions or criticisms for the press, and I'm wondering, because we're not going to spend all night on this, if you could direct.
No, I will, but I just had a question
We'll get there.
I do want to make a quick comment.
Yeah, I had a question about the team.
Yes, sir.
Does the team that comes for that, because one of the issues we had were many of the people on the front line didn't even have tasers.
Yes.
So we're curious about how the team works when it comes to de-escalation if some of them didn't even have tasers on them. That was one thing we were curious about.
My wife tells me I'm loud enough, so I don't need a microphone.
We might need it for the live stream.
Oh, okay. All right, very good. So each municipality in Burlington County, there's not a requirement that each municipality equips their officers with tasers. So it's very well that some officers who showed up there might not have had tasers. All have to have body cameras. That is a requirement. But the incident commander of that situation would be Mount Laurel, most likely the chief of police or one of his designees. And they would oversee the actions of the team in conjunction. The team has a legal advisor. We have someone from the prosecutor's office on hand. Like I said, it's well thought out, it's well trained, and we're there to serve everyone's interest, to just preserve order and keep the peace.
And I would just say, as a policy recommendation, and my branch is going to make this policy recommendation, that if you are an officer on the front line, you should have a taser. That option needs to be there. So,
duly noted.
Thank you.
All right. Let's focus on the media side of the room. And as Bob alluded to, which you didn't tell me, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. No, did the media, where did the media mess up? What did the media get right in your opinion?
I'm gonna pass the tires after, but what we were saying was some of the perceptions that were created in the way the stories were written, it was kind of given the impression that the NAACP was in opposition to the crowd goers, and that was 100% the opposite of the case. We were discussing things like the taser, and we were discussing things like let's keep in mind how power works. We were trying to explain to the protesters that you can scream as loud as you want. These frontline people have no power. So screaming at them and possibly getting a charge from getting too close to one of them isn't gonna get you too far. We're gonna go have a conversation with the police chief, and we're gonna go have a conversation with the prosecutor, because those are the entities that can move them. As when we spoke about the tasers, a new line came in after we spoke to the police chief. So we were having a conversation with the community saying, let's fight smarter, not harder. Let's think about this. But some of the images that were shot gave the impression that we were in opposition with the community. And we're like, no, these are our people. We represent the people. We have different tactics, but at the end of the day, we have the same goal, is to end white supremacy. So that's what we had a problem with some of the imagery, how it came across. And we addressed it, and we were grateful that some of the publications changed out those photos, because we know it had that impact, because people from the other side fed into that and used those same images to pit the NAACP against the community organizers. And that's the last thing we need. You can't accomplish anything divided. So the last thing we need is fuel to show that there's division when there isn't.
Okay. And just to kind of,
I just want to add something,
Yeah.
like a lot of protests, the images that most people saw were the most dramatic moments. But what people didn't see is how community came together, how people really became like a community moment. People brought food, but everything was clean, everything was organized. I remember, speaking to one of the women who live in Essex Place, who said at first she was nervous because she never witnessed anything like that in her neighborhood. But she said it was not violent, everything was peaceful. Okay, you have, so to the journalists, I say, make sure you just get more of the full story. Talk to the people. Okay, you have the chief of police, making statements that contradict what people are saying. Okay, I went to one meeting where he's saying 3 times, "Oh, I'm trying to protect you from the violent protesters," and people were clapping back saying it wasn't violent, and this was a mixed group of people in this room. Okay, so I just say, just tell that full story. I know those juicy moments, are enticing to go to, but, I think you'll get a lot more out of it if you just, make sure it's if it's a deeper story.
And we don't know who threw the rock in that window. Like, it was a peaceful event for hours, and then a rock went through the window, and all of us looking at each other like, who or why would somebody do that?
Somebody got it over that crowd, and
right. But the narrative comes when that happens that the protesters are violent, and we don't believe that to be any one of us, because we were out there literally for 7 hours without incident, and then all of a sudden a rock comes. So we want the journalists to do your homework. That's all we ask, is just do your homework.
And by bringing it to Melanie and April, I'm going to broaden this up just a little bit, because the magic word is optics. Marcus, you said that. Tyrus, you said that as well. And I'm going back to my experiences in Baltimore, optics has always been raised when covering protests, especially passionate protests such as what we saw here in Mount Laurel. Last year with George Floyd and the related protests, and even going on back to that. Melanie, since you have the mic, let me ask for your response to Marcus and Tyrus, and then if you could talk about, as far as the day-to-day, as far as what we see and how it translates to what finally gets published or broadcast.
Sure, that's a good question. I just want to say first that I'm glad we're having this conversation, and although we're talking about Mount Laurel, it could be any town. So I hope that there are lessons learned from Mount Laurel so that when it happens again, not if, but when it happens again, that we all are better educated and informed. So I have had conversations with the NAACP, and I've heard their concerns about the coverage and the imagery. But I want to say this. The fact that someone misinterpreted the photo is not our fault. It doesn't mean that we're insensitive to it, but our job as journalists is to capture whatever is happening. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent. We capture what happened. And sometimes I think the public doesn't understand what we're up against as journalists. I went there knowing absolutely nothing about what had transpired. It was a holiday weekend. I was off that day, and someone texted me and said, "You need to get to Mount Laurel." And I went to Mount Laurel to see just what was happening. And not that this is an excuse, but you have to understand what we as the media are up against. On a holiday weekend, we have 2 people working, covering the entire region, a photographer and a reporter. So I volunteered to be the 3rd person to go to get a sense of what's happening in Mount Laurel. Is there a story here? And the lesson that I have for law enforcement is I think the media did the best that we could with the information that was available. Very little information was released to us. And so, Chief, when you talk about this task force that was deployed, what was missing was the communications piece. And so we had to scramble and talk to as many people as possible to try and piece the story together. And I think we did a damn good job under the circumstances, with the time that we had. And I came back to that story several times and did a full-blown story where I talked to some of the neighbors, I talked to the homeowners association, I talked to their lawyer, and really did a deep dive. And you have to give us that opportunity. We're not going to get it all the first time. Think about it. You can't learn everything in one sitting. But you can help us by making yourselves available, and if you know things, talk to us. Sometimes we don't get information in a timely basis, even from the NAACP. Sometimes it takes you a day or two to issue a statement or a release. Well, I'm on to 10 other stories by then, so it's a missed opportunity. And what I think we need to have is better relationships. I'm proud to say that the two chiefs who are on the panel, I have relationships with them. I reached out to them. I have their personal cell phone numbers and said, hey, it's Melanie from the Inquirer. Will you come? And we don't have enough of that where we can reach out and touch the chief, or we can reach out and get to the NAACP and get an immediate response. So can we do better? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, we can do better.
April, I know you didn't cover Mount Laurel, but I'm sure you could talk more generally about the media
it was
side.
kind of driving me a little bit crazy as a photojournalist when you guys were talking about images. And I guess the thing that I would like to say to you, and having covered, I mean, I cover Camden intensely and as fairly as I can, and I've had a lot of stuff with law enforcement there and with protests there and conditions. But what I found, and I know that we're not Fox News, but people will take what they want to take away from what we put out there. Honest to God. I mean, and it's so depressing to me and frustrating to me at times that, you know, but they will do that. Invariably pick the things that you know, codify their pre-existing prejudices and beliefs. And I just wanted to tell you that that's a shared frustration for me as well, and it almost doesn't matter in terms of some of the imagery. A lot of people will do that anyway. It's yeah.
Can someone give Marcus? I saw your hand first, and then
I was going to say.
Can someone give Marcus a microphone?
I was just going to say, no one is denying that. We're all cognizant of people's preconceived notions are going to generate what their brain produces. We understand that, but we also understand that white supremacy is real, and many of our publications are owned by white supremacists. So the images, yes, I've been. As I'm saying, I'm just pointing it out because I've been a speaker for 16 years. I do media workshops. Right, yeah, so I'm just saying, I've been doing media workshops for 16 years, and I show publications from different parts of the country and show same infraction, different race, what's written about. So we cannot pretend like race doesn't impact how things are covered. So the problem that we had from that incident was there were many images shot that day. And the one image that was shot, the look of it looked like there was a disagreement between, and I personally, it was me, the protesters, and the police. And the story, it looked like I was defending the police in the photo, and that's what they ran with. We know that's not what it was, but from our point of view, there was no quotes from the NAACP. Only thing in that story was that one photo, and then it was a quote from the protesters. So the different protesters took it and ran with it. So we're saying we absolutely understand that people are going to have whatever, whatever comes to mind when they see an image is going to be based on it. But we're also saying that we understand that drama sells. And one of the other reasons that NAACP has a problem is a lot of times we don't get called until there's some drama. But we send press releases out for every positive thing that we do and get no responses. So when we see something that looks like it's inducing drama, it's hard for us not to think that it was intentional. So I think we have to be intentional about the optics when it comes to how we write and the photos that we use. And I know that it could be fixed because when I reached out and Melanie said, I don't select the photos, the editor selects the photos. And then they switched the photo. So that photo was chosen for a reason, and then they replaced it. So we're saying we have to be intentional about the imagery we put out, because that division that happens is tremendous in the community. And we went through a lot of backlash following that because of people thinking that we were protecting the police because we had a different approach to how to handle the protests. So we feel like optics matter, but the way a story is framed matter. The stories you decide to cover matters. The follow-up stories that you do matter. What communities get coverage and what time they get coverage and how often they get coverage matters. So we're saying if things are gonna ever level out, you can't just call us when it's a dramatic situation. And secondly, we're a volunteer organization. We're at work. We don't have turnaround times on statements. We have to write a statement when we can because we're volunteers.
Let me get April respond, and Corey
I
has
just
his
want to
hand up.
respond. I actually belong to the Camden NAACP.
Suspended.
I know, I know it's suspended. They're my friends. I know all about it. First of all, I just want to tell you that, like, having been at major American newspapers, they were pretty much white boys clubs. So no argument with you on that. The reason that I left the Inquirer after I got a grant to document life in Camden was because I hated the way media covered Camden. Okay, I felt that they picked these bullshit narratives, excuse my language, which was either that, like, it was a wasteland and nobody there mattered, or oh, everything's wonderful now, Camden's rising and everything's so great. It was crap. So I've pretty much dedicated myself, like, over the last, like, 6 or 7 years to covering Camden in a way that I think is fair, that really shows the heart and spirit of the city. I think, almost as many positive stories as I do sad ones, you know. But it's really hard, and I feel you, and I just wanted you to know that I see that about the media. I've spent a lot of time trying to talk to white editors at various publications about what's going on in Camden, and having a really hard time getting through to them. So I've even written about that. So I hear you, and, you know, we're doing the best we can. I know that I am, so trying. It's like every day.
If I could, and I know we need to move on, but I feel that I have to speak to this. If you haven't gathered, the photo was taken by a photographer from the Philadelphia Inquirer, where I work and have been a journalist for 21 years. And I think, Marcus, we have to agree to disagree on that photo. It was all about perception. And while you harp on that one photo, there must have been at least 9 or 10 other photos. And the photographer captured a variety of images that showed what was going on. And you can't focus on just that one photo. And you've raised a lot of issues about the journalism field. And I sit here as a black journalist. Yes, I know that we lack diversity in our newsrooms. That's something that needs to be addressed as well. But when you have a black journalist who was out there working her butt off to report that story, and all you can focus on is that one image, I think it's unfair. I think it's very unfair. And as well as whether there was a quote from the NAACP. I remember your quote, and I attempted to get it in. It didn't make the cut, and I explained that to you. And you and other community groups have this false notion that because you send a press release about something positive that you're doing in the community, that's great, but lots of organizations are doing positive things. Is it news? Most of the time, it isn't. And I suggest that you should look at the paper. I get press releases from everything from craft fairs to real news. Most of them I can't do. It isn't a story. And so I ask, do you read the paper? Do you look at the website? Have you seen us reporting on anything like that? So I think there are some false or misimpressions about what constitutes news and when you can expect coverage. So absolutely, when there's a big breaking story like what happened in Mount Laurel, yeah, we're going to reach out to the NAACP. It would be disrespectful to the leading civil rights organization for us not to contact you, but to suggest that we should just randomly call you or pick up stories that you view as positive, it's not realistic. Yeah, well, I'm not sure what it is.
Do you know when the last time you covered Southern Burlington County? Do you know the last time that you covered us? Mm-hmm. No, you.
No, I don't.
It was the Nocera case in Bordentown, and that was what, 2 years now? More than that. So we're saying we understand completely that every event that's positive isn't newsworthy. But I suggest anybody to Google Southern Burlington County. We get covered quite often because we're very busy. We stay very busy doing high-level events to bring positivity, to bring empowerment, and to end white supremacy. So we don't do lollipop events. We do real newsworthy events, and we're covered often. And we get covered by Chicago. We get covered by Washington. We get covered all across the country. Google us. So the issue that we have is when our local news don't come around often, but we have out-of-state news that somehow is finding our stories. So we're saying we would love local coverage. That's all we're saying. We're not. I'm not knocking your writing ability. I'm not knocking that you don't cover other groups. We're saying in order for this organization to survive, people need to know that we're doing more than showing up for protests. And that's how we do things all of the time. But if the only thing that gets covered is us showing up for protests, people feel we're one-dimensional. And we're very far from one-dimensional. And that's why we need coverage. That's why we appreciate mom and pop publications that care about the community. And we're trying to get bigger publications to act like the mom and pops. The term I heard at the convention that we had a black media presentation. They call South Jersey a media desert. And I never heard that term until that presentation on Saturday, and then it made sense. So we're saying, we just want equal coverage. Don't just come to us when there's drama. We don't like that reputation. We want people to know about the police experience survey.
Let me put a pin in, because we're going to, I have a couple of things I want to bring up about the ecosystem of New Jersey news. Corey?
To respond? I appreciate that, sir. I wanted to echo something that Melanie said. Early on in any investigation, but specifically this
Can you grab a mic?
event, there definitely was a lack of information flow. So for the media, there was a lack of information, and for law enforcement, there was a lack of information. If you remember when I first spoke earlier this evening, I tried to give you a really quick time capsule event of how Mr. Matthews committed his crime, then evidence came, and then he was subsequently arrested and put in jail, and how that didn't happen in 5 minutes like everybody had wanted. And number two, I want to say that categorically, there was no racism from the Mount Laurel Police Department involved in Officer White's handling of Mr. Matthews at that event. Officer White's been to my home. Officer White knows my wife. Officer White's worked on my platoon. I've given him commendations. He is one of the most professional police officers you will ever meet. He called Mr. Matthews by his name because he's dealt with him in a negative law enforcement capacity numerous times, as is reported in the newspaper, not because they're boys. And third, I want to commend you and NAACP for working with the other protesters out there. I've done that myself. There's a group called Pull Up Movement New Jersey, who you may be aware of. G. Hove is their leader. I had him on my TV show, and I work with them. So when they go and protest, I kind of help them walk the line so they can express their First Amendment rights, get the change or get the attention that they want, and not get their members hurt or arrested. So I want to commend you definitely and thank you for working with the protesters that were out there to try to mitigate any damage, any law breaking, or any injuries. So I want to thank you for that, and I would love to work with you to try to do that together in the future. So thank you for that, sir.
I think, hold on, I need to keep it moving. So turns out we have a lot more ground to cover than I realized.
Since NJSPJ is kind of the host, I feel like as a host I'm being rude to the panelists in the back row. If it were not COVID, we'd have microphones differently. If any of you it doesn't have to be a whole speech. If you want to say something, stand up and somebody will pass you a microphone.
I think now would be a good time for a time check. That's just a term for break in radio. If anybody has a question or comment, we have a microphone up front, and if you could like socially distant apart from each other or take turns coming up, that would be great. Just come when you have a question or when something pops up, and I will get to you. I promise you I will get to you as soon as possible. Since it came up a couple of times.
I just want to make a quick comment as a professor to just, one of the things that we teach is it's much more complicated than that image, right? It's much more complicated than a tagline. It's much more complicated than, you know, I don't want to say someone's truth, right? Because we all have pieces to this puzzle, right? And we have to put all those pieces together. And if you just look at one piece, you don't have the whole story. And that's one of the things that we try to teach our students, that you have to keep digging, right? You can't make judgments, you can't make assumptions based off of something you got from the media, something you got that the police said, something you got that, you know, any other group said, right? It's much more complicated than that, right? So.
Actually, if you could keep holding the microphone, because I'm going to call our academics Amber and Joe off the bench.
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, we have cameras. Let me ask this because it came up a couple of times as far as communications logistics. In fact, one of the best practices from the Attorney General's office is pre-event coordination. In your experience or from what you have studied, how realistic is that to have coordination between media and law enforcement and community leaders? I remember a couple of protests I've covered in the past where police kind of coordinated with the leaders of the protests to make sure everybody was safe and their First Amendment was protected.
I mean, that's a great question. I don't know if we're the right people. Maybe the chiefs are the better people, but well, I can say that, you know, you talked about, it seems like none of us trust each other. And if you don't communicate, you're not going to have the trust, right? So the more that, like she's saying, I have people's personal cell phone numbers, you know? Like, the more that you can communicate with each other, the more you understand each other's purpose, the more that you understand what the process is, like going to a judge and a judge denying the charges, right? That makes a difference of whether someone's going to get charged with something. Like maybe everybody understanding everyone's viewpoint and how the law works and what the media's job is and having those conversations, I think are going to help everyone move forward better.
Okay.
If that makes sense and answers your question at least.
All right, if someone could pass the mic.
Again, my name is Bud Monahan, Chief of Cherry Hill. We had several protests post George Floyd social justice protests in Cherry Hill, large-scale protests. One of the things that we attempted to do as a department was put together contact teams of officers to speak with the organizers of the protest. We tried it in advance if we could. Sometimes the protest would be organized anonymously, and we would try at the moment where they were organizing. You know, there's a saying that crisis creates opportunity, and it does, but in that crisis is not the ideal time to make that connection. It's important to make those connections before a crisis occurs. And it goes to the communication piece that Melanie touched on, the fact that there's a relationship, at least on some level, that she has my cell phone. I know she's doing a job when she calls me, but I answer the phone. I respect her position, and I'm willing to discuss what we're doing and what's occurring. Communication is critical because if you don't control the communication, then you're chasing it, and it becomes that negative perception, similar to what may take place if you see an image, as Marcus discussed. Now he's chasing the perception of that image, and I never want to chase the perception, a negative perception, because we failed to communicate our message. And you know, I think that's critically important to make those contacts as soon as you can.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything? Okay. Chief behind you.
I think the discussion we're having is important, and there's a lot of lessons to take away from here. Using this as an example, this scenario, this incident that had taken place. Because what we're talking about is something that was happening in real time. Real time for the police officers, real time for the people that were protesting, real time for you to grab a handle of it, the reporters to be there. And that's why we have an opportunity like this to dissect it, to look at it, to make the improvements. Because there's so much to glean from it. You know, like Corey said, and I would reiterate that, I've personally led dozens and dozens of protests. So I know what the dynamics are. I've been on the police side of that. I understand what they're looking at. Like the chief said, to understand what the communication is ahead of time. The report is, from my perspective, being on both sides of that, both from a civil rights perspective and wanting the press there to cover a protest, and the police side to keep you informed. That happens, and like the chief said, to have the relationships and to get that communication going beforehand is imperative. You can't do it during. The technology is there because you can live stream now. So Marcus brings to my attention that, hey, chief, you've got all these officers in the front line. None of them have less lethal options. There's no tasers. Do we want to be telling the whole world about that in real time? No. But what people don't see, what the media is not covering, is us behind the curtains having those discussions. And it's important to let the audience know and the viewers know that those discussions are happening. And they're happening in real time, and these are very fluid situations. And we can dissect it. But the calls that are being made there on the ground to de-escalate things, to diffuse things, to avoid something from getting out of hand or violent or volatile, these are the real aspects that are taking place. And for the media to report and do the follow-ups, like you're saying, Melody, to cover the different perspectives, is vital so that people understand where everyone's coming from and the views. The Asbury Park incident was one of those that people were not fully informed, because you see, like the chief said before, where you have a multi-jurisdictional response, officers from different police departments. All the public knows is they see blue. They see riot shields, they see helmets. They don't understand that it was somebody else from a different agency that came in here while the Asbury Park Police Department is trying to improve relationships with the community. And it's somebody else that said, well, you know, overtime is at 8 o'clock, so we all got to go. Let's clear this out now. Those are important for these conversations, so I appreciate the different perspectives.
In fact, I think that's a good segue because I keep returning to that word optics. And particularly when you watch cable, every group up here, the people that rely on your Fox Newses and your CNNs and your MSNBCs and God help you OANs, one or two words to describe us. Myself, April, Melanie, enemy of the people, remember that one? Oh, and Nick, I'm sorry. Blake, oh. Second time this week. Academics, elitist, NAACP, socialists trying to ruin the country, and depending on the network, law enforcement, heroes or fascists. And I think when you start peeling back the layers of each group and how each one contributes to a society, these 30 or 3-second descriptions are kind of unfair, or 3-word descriptions are kind of unfair. So I want to go to each group. All of you, or someone could pick a representative, just in a sentence or two, just in a sentence or two, tell people what you want them to know about being a journalist or a community leader or an academic or law enforcement.
Official. Yes, sir.
And just real quick, and I apologize, you know, I think it's kind of unfair sometimes to put us all into individual boxes by what we technically represent, right? So I represent the law enforcement side, and we're all shuffled over here. These gentlemen represent the NAACP, and they're smack here in the middle, and the journalists are over here, and you know, the academics are back here. We lose sight of the fact that, you know, we all have one core commonality. We're human beings first, right? I wasn't born a police officer. I was born a human being. I chose a profession, which is law enforcement. The key is not allowing my profession or what I do to define me or to override the fact that I'm a human being first. And I think we lose sight of that sometimes when we get caught up in trying to self-identify by what we believe we represent or what people believe that we represent. And if we can look at each other as human beings first, right, and that connection's important before that, because there's a lot of barriers to communication from a law enforcement perspective because we wear those barriers on our uniform, badge, gun, belt. That connection needs to be formed early on, but we can't lose sight of the fact that we're human beings and we have individual responsibilities, but if we focus on the human element, we can connect better, as opposed to focusing on the individual silos that we get placed into by what we do or what we represent.
Actually, hold that mic because I'm going to rephrase the question. Yeah, back to Bud.
I was going to say that was a perfect statement, and I appreciate you saying that because one of the biggest issues that we have is that we are all human beings, but the police, it's the police family. It's back to blue, and the problem that we have with that is at all costs, it's back to blue. It's no matter what I saw in the footage, no matter how many people have been killed, it's back to blue. It's one group says Black Lives Matter. The response is Blue Lives Matter. You just told me you weren't born blue. I was born black. So the problem is when we say these things, but in reality, in practice, that's not what's happening. What's happening is things are happening every day, and instead of there being even the slightest bit of introspection, the slightest bit of honesty, the slightest bit of accepting or acknowledging that there's some complicity, the stance is back to blue no matter what. And,
so let's,
but the problem that we have, because this is when we talk about the optics are that many of the protesters don't like police. I have great relationships with many of the police chiefs. I commend Bordentown all the time for their new initiatives. We are in favor of good policing, but what we cannot overlook or deny is that there has been a lot of bad policing lately, and we can't deny that. Like for everyone in this room who has a smartphone, who watches these videos every day, to pretend like we don't have an issue with law enforcement is a tremendous problem for me. And I think it's important that we can at least acknowledge it, at least acknowledge that this is a work in progress.
Okay.
Let's be transparent.
Okay, let me jump in here. I wish I had a gavel.
I have a question, or actually, we're all trying to find the truth. And you guys were talking about real time, and reporters are talking about the resources they actually have in real time. We have someone here, I don't want to totally get off race. Blake Nelson from NewJersey.com is somewhat of what we call a data journalist. So not so much in real time. He's looking at alleged bias in ticketing on the turnpike, on the parkway, use of force town by town, and that is a tool that journalists are using in 2021, data journalism, to try to find the truth. And Blake, I was wondering if you could stand up for a moment, tell people a little bit about your recent reporting and what resources are there for them online.
Yeah, and actually, I'll sort of try to tie together both that point and your last question. Just the reporters really, really badly want to get the story right. We really are working as hard as we can because we love when people read our stories and say, you accurately represented my worldview, you accurately represented my community. There have been data stories that I've done, especially most recently with the state police, that are not the state police's and the state police union's favorite stories in the world, but the union guys especially are not terribly upset when I'm sure they don't love them, but after they come out and I send them to them to make sure that they, because there's a relationship there, oftentimes the response is, yeah, that you accurately represented my critique of what you presented. So that to just sort of echo the importance of those relationships and the early work source building, I think what I most want people to know about journalists is we really, in wanting to get the story right, we really do love having feedback. I have changed stories, not like fundamentally, but the Attorney General's office has called me and said, we think your phrasing or particular framing about this thing could lead to a misunderstanding, blah, blah, blah. And we've changed things because we really do want to get the nuance right. Even as the number of journalists are shrinking and even as the number of people covering more and more communities is shrinking, the one, I think, really great thing that we're getting today that we didn't have before is data. And so there are, again, to highlight the Attorney General's office, there's a couple really fascinating databases that have come out recently that, I mean, are really helpful for reporters, but are also great for the public. One is you can almost track in real time how your local police department is using physical force. To reiterate, physical force is a legal, I mean, a lot of times when I say force, people hear excessive force. That is not, when someone rushes into a shopping mall with a gun, you want that person tackled. So this is tracking everything from, you know, the tackling to the hitting to the shooting. And that you can track by individual officers, individual departments. It's an incredibly extraordinary, it's an incredible way to sort of scrutinize how your local police department is doing. And one of the things you'll also see when you sort of first look at it is actually the vast majority of officers are either not using force or using very, very low amounts of force. The other database, thank you for letting me ramble, is you can now see how state troopers have issued tickets for the past 12 years. And you can break it down by race. And so that a colleague and I did a story recently about some troubling racial disparities in how those tickets are given out. But those two databases, even as we have less and less reporters, give an extraordinary look into how our officers are doing their jobs in a way that was completely impossible, 10, 20 years ago.
All right, let me throw an audible. Does anybody in the room have a question? Okay, you come down to anybody else? All right, if you could make your way down. The number, if you have a question, is 555. No, I'm just kidding. All right, yes, sir, you, sir.
Hey, my name's Ever. I'm actually in both Rizzo and C's class. But,
I'm sorry. I think you could take your mask off to...
Hey, I'm Everestus. I'm actually in Rizzo and C's class. But
Okay.
my question is, how do we know, the general population in general, like the community, how do we know that the source that we're getting our news from is, credible, like the information is real? Because I feel like, there are certain things that were said here as far as trust, communication. We could all communicate, but if we don't understand each other, how do we get the message, the right way?
How do we trust that the source is credible?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, can I answer that as a professor?
All right. The professor and
So,
George.
one of the things that we do try to do with our students is give them resources to determine what would be considered a credible source. If you go into my Blackboard course shell, into extra information, right? Extra resources, there's a whole folder on determining whether a source is credible, right? Where it's coming from. There's also a source on how to determine news agencies' lean, political lean, right? It is an independent source that determines, right? They give you a graph, are they right, are they left, are they in the middle, right? So students are provided that. We could talk about it more in class. Professor Rizzo does, I do try. That is also for other classes too. It's not just for criminal justice, right? But that's a very good question because it is very difficult for the general public to understand what's a credible source. Or they see something on Facebook, it must be true. I have a quote, it's a meme on my class, and it says, you can't believe everything that you read on the internet. And it says, signed by Abraham Lincoln. Well, it takes a while, right? You got it pretty quick. But it takes a while for they go, huh? Yeah, there's no internet, right, when Abraham Lincoln was around, right? So it takes a little bit. So some of you just got that, right? That's why you're laughing. So, and that's what you have to do, right? I use memes. I try to use things that are funny, but It is very difficult, and I feel your pain. It's difficult for us to teach you how to determine, right? So, if someone else has a good answer for that also, I would certainly appreciate that, but it is a job of us to try to teach our students how to figure that out, right? So he's a new student, so we're gonna give him a pass from there. We've only had our students for 2 weeks, so we haven't gotten to that part yet, but it's definitely something that we do try, right, to make sure our students can understand that.
Okay, I'm gonna do the chief and then I'm gonna do Tyrus and then.
Yes, very good question.
So from a law enforcement perspective, how do we build trust in our community? That's so important to us in today's day and age. I don't know if you've heard of the term 21st century policing, but that's one of the key pillars of that, is building trust and legitimacy in our neighborhoods, in our communities. So how do we do that? Number one, it's by being transparent with our residents, okay? Acknowledging if there are issues, having accountability with our officers, okay? Holding them accountable, implementing measures that's gonna detect misconduct and addressing it. And most importantly, it's building those relationships through various community policing initiatives, okay? Getting down one-on-one, because I'm not gonna lie, years ago, there was an us versus them mentality, and that doesn't work. We need to band together with our communities to solve problems, listen to them. So that's how we build trust from a law enforcement perspective, and we're working on that. And if I could just circle back to Mark, what Marcus said, Chief Monahan stood up and I think made some really salient points about being a human being. I'm a police officer as well, but that doesn't define me. If you were to see me outside of this uniform, I'd be in an Eagles jersey or a Bryce Harper t-shirt. You'd never know I'm a police officer. I'm also an academic. I am on the board of advisors here at RCBC. So one thing doesn't define us, and there's so many good initiatives being done in this state. We are at the forefront of police reform. And Tom Eichert's been sitting here and he hasn't talked yet, but he is one of the architects of that reform. And I can tell you from a personal perspective, we don't back the blue law enforcement when there is wrongdoing. And my department exposed it, and I'm not saying that to put us up on a pedestal, because there's a lot of other departments that have done the same. And to kind of just pigeonhole law enforcement and say that we're always going to back the blue no matter what the circumstance, that's just not true. And Tom can speak to all the reform that's being done. We should be proud of the measures that New Jersey has taken to be a leader in police reform. And Tom, that's a perfect segue for you.
Wait, I actually said Tyrus could go.
From an activist point of view, I'd say, follow us on social media and look at the content we put out. So many, people are getting third-party information about NAACP, but do you actually look at our Facebook? And look at page and see what we put out. Maybe not every one of our press releases gets put in the news, but we certainly will put it on social media. Marcus does live feeds all the time. So the good thing about this day and age is that you don't just have to wait for a news source, to get information about people or from people. You can go directly to them. Anytime there is a protest, there's usually some credible activists on the grounds, doing a live feed, giving information. So, I encourage you from, a community activist point of view, make sure you're following those different activists.
Now, it would be great if you could wait for us to say, because we could use the audience. Blake was next.
Tom Eichert can jump in then.
Oh, okay.
I'll be quick. I didn't want to say too much because it's been interesting and I wasn't involved directly in the Mount Laurel situation. I had a couple of perspectives. One, part of my job is to look at the bigger picture and see what policies we can put in place to address these. That was part of why we came out with the press and police guidance. And that was really focused on the press and the police more than the public. And maybe that was a mistake, but that was what we did at the time. So I think the communication before the event and while the event's happening, as was explained, is really critical, because what the police are seeing is their legitimate role of protecting the property, protecting a person from being dragged out and beaten up. And there were certainly people whose emotions were high enough, they might have done it if they had the opportunity. I don't know. I wasn't there. But that's their job. But explaining that so people understand, they're not backing this person. They're not there because they support him. They're there because that's part of their job. I think that communication about that is critical, has to be with the groups there. So that's that. And then afterwards, talking about it, what happened, what went well. I mean, there were things I saw in the video that I thought the police, I'm not saying they handled everything perfectly, but they showed a lot of restraint. I mean, they were having things thrown at them, you know, water and sodas and stuff primarily, but I've seen, we've all seen police go crazy for a lot less. And in Philadelphia, you know, one of the things we did was we try to learn from these incidents. So when we see something happening that really goes sideways, that's when we issue policies. And one of the things that New Jersey has that we're unique in the country, one of the few states that the Attorney General has the ability, as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, to issue a directive that's applicable to every police officer. So that gives us an opportunity to be a laboratory for this. So we issued a new use of force policy last year. One of the things we put in that were guidance, I don't want to get into too much, but guidance about what force police can use with crowds and when they can use it. And the fact that they cannot deploy tear gas unless there's a means for the people to, you have to tell them that what you're going to do. You have to give them a warning with a bullhorn so they can hear it. And you have to give them an opportunity to comply, and they have to have a means to comply. So you can't put them on the Vine Street Expressway and then close off both sides and then gas them. So we put that in there. Thankfully, we haven't had to deal with it in New Jersey, but we wanted that policy there so if it comes up, it'll be in the future. One thing I want to say, how do you trust the source? I mean, part of the reason we did the data release, and Blake deserves credit because his story that kind of socked it to us about force caused us to get in high gear and start collecting that data. And we're the only state in the country that has, within a month, you have real-time data of every use of force. And you don't, I mean, now you have to believe it's in there, but it's not me spinning it. It's not me telling you what I think you should think about it, whether you're an academic, whether you're a member of the public, an activist. You have the actual data, and whether you're a researcher, you can go in and look at that data. That's why we did it, so that people can have the opportunity to dig in and then find things that are problematic and call them out, and then we have to either answer to the public satisfaction or we have to change it. And that's what I keep saying to the police, state police and others, is either you got a good explanation or you got to do something to change it. There's no in between. That's basically it. And the data is what it is. And so that's part of the reason we pushed that data out. And we're the only state in the country that has it. And it's a little wonky, but you can go in and look at your town and say, how much force is being used? Which officers are using force? And then raise it at a city council meeting if you want. So we did it really as a tool. It hasn't really caught on as much as I think it will. But there's about a year's worth of data in there now, and there's 10 years worth of stop data from New Jersey State Police. So I just want to say that about how do you determine credibility.
Like things you want to add, or yeah.
Can I just real quickly address the student who had just previously asked? Were you also asking how to flag credible news organizations? Was that part of the question? I'm just going to answer this like it was. There are two things I would look for especially if you're looking for like local news. One is if the reporter has shown their work, if you could conceivably recreate everything they've done because they're telling you who they've talked to and where they went, what they saw. That is a good sign for trust. And actually, I would also look for news organizations that have corrections. Every correction I've ever had to issue haunts me and will continue to haunt me until I am dead. But when you see corrections on a news organization site, you know that they are flagging their problems and fixing them and being transparent about when they do. So I just throw that out.
Marcus, real quick. Someone give.
As we talk about the sources, I just want to touch on that one really quickly. The Southern Burlington County released a police experience survey because after the Mount Laurel incident, we got a lot of different reports from residents, and we wanted to hear from the source, from the actual residents. So if you go to SBC, NAACP.org, that's where the survey is. And the data has been compelling. It's many different incidents where people are pointing out how they feel they're being tailed in certain cities, how they feel that certain people are coming up to the car with their gun on a holster, addressing you with a yell in order to emasculate you in front of your children. There's a lot of data that's coming from the people that doesn't exactly make it to a report, but it's what people are experiencing. And this is why we came up with this tool, because we're gonna take these results because we care about policy change. Like whatever we're doing doesn't matter if we don't impact the policy change. So it's like, what we haven't heard much during this whole presentation is the role of racism. And we cannot pretend like racism doesn't impact who gets pulled over, how they're interacted with when they are pulled over. This isn't speculation. There's data on this all over the country. We're working with Rutgers right now, developing more data on these things. So what we have to keep in mind is that bias is real, and we applaud the police departments that are working to get better at it. We applaud Bordentown. We applaud Burlington City. Like we have some stellar examples throughout our county, but we also have some departments that need some help. And that's why we're looking for more uniformity when it comes to the legislation, to the policies, so that we don't just have a couple we can point out. We want to feel like everyone we go to is going to be the same treatment. We still have sundown towns in Burlington County. And for people who don't know what that is, that's places you do not go after sun is down. So we cannot pretend that we don't have an issue that needs to be addressed. I can never say who is racist and who is not. Okay, so I just want to point that out. Like, the sources are important, but let's not forget the Innocence Project every day is showing that a lot of people's testimonies have been bold-faced lies. So the sources always have to be questioned, because you don't know what's motivating a person's reason to testify. We got to be honest about that. Racism is in every fabric of our society, and when we act like it isn't, we miss the point all the time.
Put a pin in that, because I'm going to return to that at some point. Yes, your question.
Professor Rizzo, I'm very sorry for this.
You don't have to be sorry.
Well, I'm one of his outspoken students, and I wasn't originally going to come up tonight, but my partner called me a few hours ago because as a man of color, he is not comfortable around police. He had to call them himself because he was in a situation, and the second call he made was to me because I am a white voice on the phone. That's not ever a call that you want to get, ever. I grew up here right in Mount Laurel. Before I lived here, I lived in Burlington County. And I thought, as a white woman, this was a great county to grow up in. Lumberton was a great place to live in. My parents were working class. My dad's a corrections officer and my mom's a nurse. I know people. This is what my family does. And I've lived in Philly. I've lived out in Delaware County. And I'm going to tell you right now that the racism here in Burlington County is just as bad as what you see in Delaware County. But the thing is, because this is an upper middle class community, it goes under. And you will not see it unless you look for it. So I want to know what all of you are doing to work with these guys and the Black community to make that stop, to make sure that the optics are better, because we're better, we can do better.
Yeah, that's a good question.
My name is Corey, and I want to apologize for just the emotion that you're feeling right now and the emotion that your partner must be feeling, having to go through that. I mean, having been a law enforcement officer for 27 years, to me that's unacceptable that so many in my community would feel that way. It's unacceptable. I don't want my kids to feel that way. I don't want to feel that way, and I certainly don't want any residents to feel that way. It's unacceptable. To answer your question, what are we doing? As a retired officer, I teach verbal de-escalation and professional tactical communication to law enforcement officers. Just Monday, I taught 27 Burlington County officers representing multiple departments how to address people, how to treat people with dignity and respect. Now you would say, Corey, don't people know how to do that automatically? Some people are rough around the edges, and we want to make it, as the Attorney General representative indicated, we want to make policy. We want to make it so it's undeniable that this is the way you do it. And on my business cards right here, if you look at the 5 universal truths that we teach in verbal de-escalation, is all people want to be treated with dignity and respect. And that is what I believe, that is my mission. So to answer your question, law enforcement badly wants to get this right. As he said as a reporter, we badly want to get this right. We do understand that there are issues. We are working to fix them. There's different agencies that are hiring law enforcement officers to give them better tools to be able to use force that has less of a chance of creating injury, and how to communicate with people in a professional, respectful, dignified manner so people don't feel nervous if they have to call 911 for an emergency. So again, I really apologize. That is unacceptable. And again, my name is Corey. I'd be more than happy to talk to your partner and help him figure out a way that he can deal with this, because it's unacceptable that he feels that way.
The other thing is, what are you doing to do community outreach as well? Because it's one thing to do something inside the law enforcement department itself, but if it's not reaching the community, that message isn't reaching the community, and you don't have that relationship of trust, then what you do inside the law enforcement community isn't going to be effective.
So part 2 is I have podcasts where I talk to youth on how to interact with law enforcement to protect their dignity and their lives, because you have to have that talk with everybody. I have 2 white stepkids, and I had to have the talk with them. You get stopped by the police, this is what you do, and this is what you don't do. I go to high schools, I go to houses of worship, I speak to all levels of community. I've been on 3, 6, 10, and Fox speaking to the community about how to interact with law enforcement in a safe way, and how law enforcement needs to change to make ourselves more approachable, less like back the blue at all costs, because that's not acceptable. I back the blue when the blue does well. The blue doesn't, look out. You don't want Corey on your bad side, because I will point you out, okay? So I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best on everywhere I can. Anybody who will invite me to come out and try to mitigate that.
Let me hold on. I have to gut check something. And you say you have white kids. Now, and I don't mean any disrespect, but you know as well as I do, a white child dealing with a cop is different than a black child dealing with a cop. And I'm sure you love your stepkids, but I've read stories. I haven't done any yet, but I'm sure that time's coming. But I have to point that out. There's a different. Your stepkids are going to have a different interaction with a cop or your brother officers than, say, a black officer.
I don't doubt that at all, but they're still mine. I still had to have the talk with them. But I have the talk with my nieces, my nephews, my cousins. I have the talk with everybody. Anybody who will listen. If I go to a party and they're talking about law enforcement, they had a bad experience, I get both sides of it, and I try to figure out, did law enforcement do something wrong, or did they do something wrong, and how can we make that better? Because we can all do something wrong. I've been a black man for 51 years. I've had influences with law enforcement. My dad taught me, he gave me the talk. Hands up on the steering wheel, yes or no, sir? I had 0 problems growing up, 0. And I want everybody to be able to mimic that. I know that's not the way it is today. My goal is to have that. I'm not saying that's the way it is today. My goal is to have that, and that's my mission, and that's what I do for my career.
I just want to answer what I feel like I'm doing as a journalist, because that kind of resonated with me. My boyfriend is black also, so I've worked through a lot of these issues in discussions with him. But in Camden, where I don't cover Burlington County really as a rule, but in Camden, what I do is I try to hold the police really accountable in the things that I write about law enforcement in the city. What happened in Camden was that they switched over from city to county policing, famously, and when the Black Lives Matter movement, everything last summer, they got all this credit for community policing, which they didn't quite deserve yet. Obama came and congratulated them when they didn't really quite deserve it yet. They were still doing broken windows theory stuff and pulling people over for nothing, and I wrote about police brutality when it happened, but What I found is that in the last year, they've actually really finally embraced it. And it seemed to me that the key in Camden was getting more officers of color, more people from the city to actually police the city themselves, where they kind of, everybody knew the cast of characters. There was a lot more empathy, and it's just gotten a lot better. But as a journalist, I felt like my role was to kind of hold their feet to the fire on it and make sure they were really practicing what they were preaching. So I think that's what we try to do.
I wanted to touch upon getting back to your phone call and having a room full of journalists, students, journalists themselves, academic, law enforcement, and looking at one of these the common things that we could work on together to expose issues like that, for us to improve what we're doing, for the NAACP and other members of the community and community-based organizations to hold us accountable, and really crystallize a lot of things. You got to realize the amount of data and information that's available to you. Blake was only scratching the surface. Tom knows what the data is on use of force because they had to put it out there. It was a public record before it was published. So know it's available to you. Those phone calls are available to you. So that when these gentlemen are out in the community and they're taking those surveys, we have a record of it. The body-worn camera footage, there's a record of it. We have the journalists here that could expose it. We have the law enforcement officers here to hold the officers accountable, to audit the system. The top guy here on policy making. He knows that I'm one of his biggest critics, but I'm one of his best partners, right? It's there, it's available to you. Use the information, quantify it, put it together, put the face behind it, put the voice there so that everyone understands it. So that we could come and have discussions and get educated through these processes. And it's very vital to understand what's out there. Virtually, if you look at the Attorney General's directives, everything there under the sun is available to you. All these recordings. I'm in the Supreme Court right now as a litigant against a police department to have some sunlight on issues relating to public records. So know what's available to you. I wouldn't mind putting together a list and sharing it with the academia so that your students can work on projects and then we can share them with journalists. That's what we do. That's what we're here for. It's going to improve law enforcement. That would be great. Tom said 12 years of traffic stop data. That's unheard of. You're talking millions of stops. That's 2 million stops a year by the state police. To be able to look at that and then break it down by race is incredible. So the information's there. Just know where to look for it, and everyone will help you through those processes.
You gotta pony up, Bob. Come on.
Yes. I'll put my password up on the wall later, and thank you to both of you who read the story previously. But what we had found was, and really most of the credit goes to the colleague Riley Yates, who I worked on this with, but what he figured out, and then I was able to confirm and we were able to look into, is when you break down how tickets are given out, it's basically Black, Asian, and Hispanic drivers are ticketed at higher rates than white drivers. Sometimes, not in every case, but sometimes officers have discretion about whether or not to give a ticket, and pretty much every single way we cut the data, white drivers were given a pass and a warning most of the time, while non-white drivers, actually Asian drivers, were given a pass the least amount of the time. And this is one of these really, really tricky things because we have a lot of experts in the story saying this is almost certainly implicit bias, but this is a really tricky thing to sort of dig into because the oversight the state police in particular use, there's a lot of layers to it and there's a lot of good parts to it, but it's really good for rooting out individual outliers. If one trooper is going crazy and only targeting one group, alarm bells are going to go off like crazy, that it works. But what some other government watchdogs have flagged is that the oversight is not as good when you're trying to sort of flag system-wide issues. And so there's a lot of unanswered questions about the bias that could be happening with ticketing, but what we know for sure is that there's a distinct racial disparity in how those tickets are given out, and have every year for the past 12 years.
Okay, Marcus is next. I'm going to be judicious with the time because I see people lining up.
And I'm just going to say, I just wanted to
I just wanted to apologize to you. Yep, right here. I just want to apologize for what your boyfriend had to deal with. Because what angers me is you explain the pain of that situation, and we're telling you how we should act, how we should conduct ourselves. And the conversation isn't changing the culture that's causing this problem in the first place. And that's what's missing here. Like, we need accountability. And this is why, as much as we applaud that New Jersey is one of the front runners in this country in terms of police reform, we applaud the works of the Attorney General's office and the different police departments who are enacting the directives. But we still don't have a police transparency record bill passed. We still don't have a civilian complaint review board bill passed. We still don't have the ending of enslavement and involuntary servitude 145, ACR 145. I got to look it up, but look it up. In New Jersey, people who are arrested still have to do work under slave conditions in prison. That's a thing in New Jersey. So we have the police unions fighting these things tooth and nail. And we are saying, if we're ever going to get to a point where that phone call doesn't happen, we have to have transparency in these records. We need to know what a person has done, what happened in their last stop. We need transparency. Civilian complaint. This is a civilian event today. So we're saying we would like to have civilian oversight of our police departments, because when the ACLU has studied the internal affairs across the state, the data has been staggering about how many cases have actually been founded. So data is important if it's used properly. You know. Right. Oh, really? So, thank you. But we can't get away from the fact that racism is real, discrimination is real, and the police have a duty to the community, and our elected officials have a duty to the community, and our police and our elected officials are not holding people accountable so that the people can feel safe. And that has to change. So everything that we're doing, we just want it to be uniform across our county, so that the experience your boyfriend had and many other experiences that we're collecting every day, that starts to change. And again, we do apologize for what he had to go through. Sir, please, I'm not the person to apologize to. Seriously, I'm not the person. I work in West Philly, and several months ago, one of our students was shot right across the street. Gentlemen, I do not scare easy. I want you to go into spaces where there are persons of color, and you are the only one there. I want you to spend time there, and I want you to record what it feels like. Because you will feel like the odd person out, and you will find out when you walk, all eyes will be on you. And having that feeling day after day after day is stressful, and it is tiring. And if you don't, I can't even imagine. And I've been in Black spaces where I've been detrimental to the person I'm with because of the color of my skin.
And I would invite you to drive around with the police also. I'm the only white guy that lives in a Black neighborhood. That's my neighborhood. That's where I live. That's where I chose to work. That's where I chose to move. I love it there. I feel comfortable. I got to meet all my neighbors. And what we've done is we're taking people for rides so that you can see what the perception is of the community, looking at the officers driving, to see what that feels like. And you see how people stare at you, and that you got 3 or 4-year-old kids coming up to the car telling you that they don't like the police. There's a lot here that we could work on together. And we look forward to those collaborative efforts. And then have the reporters. I got producers and reporters calling us to do ride-along. So you get to see what it's like as well. Get the experience. Let's understand each other's perspectives. Because at the end of the day, we're all human.
I think for time purposes,
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a good question. Melanie, did you want to?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, my name's Allie. I'm a student here.
If you could.
Oh, sorry. I'm a student here. I'm a criminal justice major. I also turned 18 during the pandemic, and right after that, I moved back to Philly to protest for 4 months. I'm fortunate enough to have friends in the community that were like leading protests there. Got shot, got tear gas, not a fun time, but I also, as mentioned, attended a wonderful protest where the police were there and like helping with community leaders, and I organized murals and we set up a homeless encampment and a lot of like wonderful things. And I see the side of it which is absolutely awful, which is obviously people dying and racism and things that are 100% real. And then I meet my professors back there who I've both had, and they're wonderful people, and they've both been in that field of work. And I talk to officers in my town that are very nice, and that doesn't account for the ones that are bad. But I know that it seems like some of you have a good relationship here, and I was going to ask as a general question, how do you think that it could be better as a whole? Like the relationship between, like, could there be meetings between everyone? Is there some organized form of discussion? Because it seems like the times that it was working were the times that everyone was communicating.
Anyone want to?
I can tell you, it's part of what we're doing and why it's not enough. So when the Attorney General came in, the prior Attorney General came in almost 4 years ago, he instituted a requirement that every county prosecutor hold 4 meetings, community meetings every year, open to the community, and talk about issues of importance to the community, whether it's immigration, police bias, whatever, use of force, whatever it is. And they're required to hold these. But that's one meeting. It can be multiple meetings, but it's one meeting in a big county. That's not going to get it done. You need these individual chiefs who are going to have those direct connections to the community members and make themselves accessible. I will tell you, it's a hard thing to dictate from the Attorney General's office. It's really got to come, in my opinion, from the community. So the community, we have 550 police departments in New Jersey. It's crazy how many police departments we have. And home rule, in my view, is a little overdone here, but don't quote me on that. I guess I already quoted myself. But the value of home rule is that you have that power in the community, in that local space, to demand those meetings, to demand those discussions. And so you have to take advantage of that. So it makes it hard for us up here to kind of force everyone to do it. It's not going to work if we try it anyway. We do it on the county level, but I would say organize yourself. And most chiefs, even if they don't want to, if you get some people and say, we want to sit down and talk to you, they're going to do it. They're going to do that, and that could lead to the kind of discussion you're talking about. So, and we have meetings, of course, all sorts of meetings with other different community organizations to understand their perspective. And
Quick interjection. I had to walk off so no one would see me cackle because, again, I just moved here from Maryland. So we're used to county level stuff. So dealing with exponentially more entities in a new state, I had to come up with a strategy when I started covering South Jersey for WHYY.
No, I was going to say, the NAACP, on a state level, we actually just met with the Attorney General's office. So we make it a practice to meet on a state level with the Attorney General's office often. But from a local level, Southern Burlington County makes it our business to meet with our elected officials as well as our police officers. And Tyrus and I organize an event. We try to do it every year where we bring in the different police chiefs in our jurisdiction. And Tyrus, you can touch on that too, on how effective it is and how we sit together.
In terms of our
police forum.
And how many departments as well that you deal with?
We have 14 towns in our jurisdiction, and 10 of those towns have police departments. So we have 10 police. We have 10 police departments out of the 14 towns, and we're always able to get all 10. The first year we did it, we got all 10 because of us reaching out. The second time we did it, we needed the help of the prosecutor because they didn't want to come on their own. So Scott Kafina, we love him. He made the call for us, and we were able to get all the different police departments. But it's that conversation. Like, we're not adversaries. We're supporting our community, and we have to hold people accountable. But a lot of us are friends. Like, I have many of the police chiefs' cell phone numbers because we have to have relationships. But it's our job to hold the police accountable because you have power. You have power that when you don't use it correctly, then the community suffers. So it's up to us to make sure that you're using that power. But another thing that we do at Southern Burlington, when we have our police forum, or if we have an elected officials forum, we make everyone sit amongst each other. We remind people when you're in our space that you are of the people. You can get elected or you can not get elected and you'll be a civilian tomorrow. So don't forget that you're connected to this community, and we make it a practice to make sure everyone sits together.
I was like to make a point to, there's always a lot of conversations about working together, but I also want to make a point that Black people, we have said many times what is needed, what is necessary, okay? So just listen to that, okay? But too many times we give these suggestions, we do the work, we did our part and said, hey, this is what is needed, but then we get symbolic gestures, or we'll get something small, we'll get the body cameras, that's nice, but what we've seen over the years, they just prove what we've already known, and then there's all these errors that happen, and then on top of that, there's still not that fundamental, not a lot of that fundamental hard change is made, okay? So I just encourage people to just, listen to, the homework is already there. Okay, so, let's not both side this too much and expect, Black people to keep on talking, giving you this advice, on top of processing the trauma that that we have to deal with, in dealing with police brutality and other forms, of racism, because it ultimately isn't too much of a both side. Like I'm very careful about, both siding a conversation. One of you mentioned how, the looks you get when you're driving through. There's a reason for that. It's not a prejudice. It's a response to a prejudice. Okay, so it's not really equal standing. So I just say the information's out there. Listen to us. Don't stop with the symbolic gestures and actually make that fundamental change.
And get involved with the political process. All of these bills have stalled. Right. The only bill that has made it out is the S3939 that allows the police to view the body cam footage before writing a report. That's the only thing that's made it out of the legislature. So until all of us in this room and everyone who's watching this feeds starts getting involved on the political side, nothing is going to change. Expecting people to change has been a terrible, terrible policy. Policy change is how people change. If people's pensions were tied to these settlements, I guarantee police brutality would change tomorrow. So until we start getting real policies enacted, nothing's going to change. We can have a dog and pony show every day. But until it's policies, until people are paying attention, every one of these hearings that I'm on, it's not a lot of us there. We need more young people there. We need more young people at the polls, and we need more young people at these hearings because they don't hear us anymore. But they hear you because your votes matter. It's election year, y'all.
All right, let's move to the next question.
Hi, I'm Professor Rizzo's student. I'm an intro to criminology, or to the criminal justice system, and my question is directed towards law enforcement. When it comes to, I'm growing up in like a time where it's very pivotal for young people in America, specifically Black, Indigenous, people of color. And I'm curious if there's a genuine understanding for how things like Back the Blue or the Brotherhood, or how that feels to young people of color, specifically Black people in America, while we are suffering in times where people are like genuinely in pain. So I think that that's like something that's not always considered. Sorry, I'm a little nervous, but
you're doing just fine.
Just like, sorry. Just the idea that there is a group of people who are supposed to serve and protect, but many interests lie within their own people. I think that that's a real concern that a lot of us have, specifically young people, and I'm curious if there's an understanding for that.
So, it's a hard issue. It's a consistent one. I'll tell you one of the things that we did. We issued a new policy that requires officers to intervene if their fellow officers engaged in misconduct. And that was there before, but we made it much more explicit. They're required to report it, and they're is prohibited from being retaliated against if they do. That's number one. Number two, every officer in the state has to take training that we went around the country and saw where the best training was. Ironically, it started out in New Orleans, which had one of the worst police-citizen relationships in the country, but out of that came a really good program of how to train officers to intervene and stop misconduct by their fellow officers, and how to train officers to accept that intervention and not see it as a negative thing. So every officer is required to do in-person training in that. There's some other things we're doing too about how to de-escalate situations with people in a mental health crisis, because there's a lot of overlap between police use of force and deadly use of force in people in mental health crisis. So those two things, it's a big thing to tell every police department, you're going to take a day and a half out of every one of the 38,000 officers, and you're going to go through this training. They didn't love that. I think, well, I'll let them speak for themselves. I'm pretty sure they weren't welcoming it, because we also have other trainings that are there on implicit bias, on the use of force policy more broadly. So that's one sort of concrete thing we're trying to do. The other thing we're doing is we're looking at the police training at the academy, because it starts with recruitment, and then it starts in the academy. And how you approach the whole feel of the academy makes it, I think, it shapes the officers that come out of it. And so what we're doing is we're taking and starting from scratch and saying, how can we move from a militaristic boot camp mentality and still create a high bar of professionalism and high standards of accomplishment, but do it without demeaning people and without, using, if you brutalize your recruits, what do you think they're going to do when they get the power? They're going to do the same thing. So that's the implicit message that you're sending. So we're looking at that whole thing to try to change that. And then we also have there's a proposal that's coming out soon for police licensing that will require retraining as part of the condition of being a police officer. You will have to go have continuing education in order to maintain your status as a police officer.
I think Bud wanted to say.
I just had a quick question to your question here. So once they go through the training, and let's say that they do have an infraction after they've gone through the training, what's the consequences from the Attorney General's office standpoint?
Well, it's now in the use of force policy. It goes into effect January 1st. Once they violate that policy, then their chief would hold them accountable. Their IA would hold them accountable. If there's a violation of that policy to intervene, or there's a violation retaliating against somebody who properly intervened, then they should be written up and disciplined appropriately. Now, I'm not personally going to do that. There's 38,000 officers. That's the individual chiefs have to do that.
So it goes back to?
It goes back to the home rule, goes back to their internal affairs process. So, I know you don't have a lot of faith in that, but that's another thing we're doing, is getting much more data out there, and Rich is getting more to address the effectiveness of the internal affairs process. Is it really doing it? And Rich has done studies, and a lot of people have, but we're getting more data out there, because that's part of the participatory democracy thing, is that if the data is there, then the citizens have to be engaged and hold people accountable, because the chiefs report to the hiring authority. It's either and so if they're not satisfied, that the people have a means to rectify it. So ultimately, it comes back to the participatory democracy.
And one of the things to ensure, aside from the training, right, because the training involves the human element of reporting another officer if they're doing something wrong or intervening during a use of force, we also have a responsibility to leverage technology that's available currently to us. And as an example, 2 examples, in Cherry Hill, we're one of 3 police departments in the country where we're testing transcription software embedded into our body cameras, that if officers use any type of racially negative words, profanity, it automatically triggers that video to be sent to a supervisor for a mandatory review. It transcribes the entire incident, and the supervisor has to review it to ensure that the conversation or the words that the officer used were appropriate at that time. We also invested in a product called Signal Sidearm that is placed on the officer's duty holster. Anytime that the officer removes their handgun from their holster, it automatically turns on every body camera and every in-car camera within the area of that officer. So even if the officer's backup officer is there and they don't have their camera on, it automatically turns that camera on through Bluetooth technology as soon as that handgun is removed from the holster, because we want to remove the human element from it, because stressors could be involved, or if an officer just decides not to turn on the camera and they want to, harass someone, take their gun out, or do something like that, it's automatically going to capture it. So we have a responsibility to leverage that technology to ensure that we have compliance with the policies that we have in place. We have responsibilities on both ends, both the training end, but also in the investment in the technology end, and that also comes with funding, right? Because, I'm lucky to be in a municipality that funds that type of equipment, and I believe it's the responsibility of the state to make sure that funding is available to all municipalities, so we have the same equipment across the board, so that my department's not different from another department.
Just real quick, just to touch on, from a community aspect, how do we connect with young people growing up in post-George Floyd? I have an 18-year-old daughter. We had some hard conversations at the dinner table about what was going on in Minnesota and how that wasn't representative of law enforcement as a whole. We don't want to make sweeping generalizations about anybody, right? But what can we do from our profession to connect better with people your age? And once again, I circle back to, being involved in our community, okay? And I'm not even going to talk about what we do in Bordentown, because these programs are countywide, mentoring programs. We're in our schools, with kids at risk. Our police officers are, and we'll put officers of color from our department in there so they can connect, and see a positive role model who is a police officer to develop that relationship from an early age. Diversifying our police departments, that's very much a priority for not just my town, for towns throughout Burlington County, Camden County, wherever. Making partnerships with agencies perhaps you overlooked in the past. We have some African-American fraternal organizations in our town that we've partnered with in the last 5 years. We have toy giveaways for the young kids. Once again, they're seeing at a young age that these officers are truly invested in their community and they care about us. So I think that's really important with everything that's being said, but making that investment in that community and all these different programs that you might not hear about every day, but law enforcement is really putting an emphasis on these days. So hopefully that's going to change that narrative and get people your age and younger than you and older to really trust us and break down those barriers.
All right, let me see who else. Anybody else got a question yet? All right.
The easiest, but here's the thing though, and we have a great relationship, but the easiest way for us to build trust is if we hear other police departments speaking up when other police departments aren't doing their job correctly. That's the easiest way to gain our trust. Like, that's what we want. Like, right. But that's what we need. We need the same way, and this is a real life example because I'm communications for the state. The same way any black person does anything, they call it NAACP to get a statement like we had something to do with that. The police need to be making statements too when officers are acting outside of decency and also policy. We need to see you hold each other accountable so we can feel, because what happens is, because you never speak up for the bad things, when you do try to do the community policing, we can't trust that. We want to trust it. We grew up loving the police. We grew up playing basketball with the police, playing football with the police. Now, every time someone gets shot or disrespected or emasculated, there's not a word, there's not a peep out of our local law enforcement. We want people to step up and say, that was dead wrong, and we won't be doing that in our town. So until we start seeing police doing that, there's no way there's going to be trust. It's just not.
Okay, listen, I gotta keep it moving.
Obviously, I mean, major incidents, political incidents across the nation have been widely denounced by law enforcement. George Floyd, there are we're walled off in certain use of force situations by the AG's guideline, but I think you will see that people, chiefs and law enforcement executives do come out and denounce bad behavior quite routinely. So once again, let's not make sweeping generalizations about one another. We're here to unite and not be divisive, and I'm definitely listening and learning from everybody here.
Yes.
Good evening. I'm Special Agent Vernon Addison with the FBI Newark Division. I cover the Trenton. I'm in the Trenton Resident Agency, and I also cover Burlington, Mercer County for civil rights issues. So I have a couple statements and then a couple questions. I think the young lady asked about the blue. And I have to be honest, I've been in law enforcement for 29 years. I was a police officer before, and I've been in the FBI for 26 years. The community does find that as a problem, and I think we have to hear that. When I go in and I see blue flags and I see patches on people's uniforms, but not the American flag, but a blue one, that is problematic. And frankly, I'm not even sure, and I'll say this is my opinion, so this is not from the FBI. I'll clarify as my opinion. That's something that we have to recognize. The other part I think we have to do is, when we have forums like this, patrol officers need to be in here. Because people hear from chiefs, but the chiefs aren't the one giving the community problems out on the street. And they're not hearing these messages, even though you may be communicating, but you may be communicating down the chain of command, and by the time it gets down to the guy that rides around in a patrol car, it's a different message. And we know that from even the academy, just to be honest. You get taught one thing in the academy, when you come out of the academy, the person that you're riding with says, hey, forget everything you learned in the academy, this is what we're gonna do. So I think we have to be open to that. And so one of the questions, before I make another comment, is to Tom, and I know Tom very well because he used to be at the U.S. Attorney's Office, is the Attorney General considering requiring every police department in the state to have an FTO, a field training officer, like a certified field training officer program. So it's not somebody with 3 years on training somebody that just got out of the academy, or somebody that maybe have disciplinary problems that just because they have 10, the most arrests in the department, they get to be the trainer of a police officer. Are we going to try to require that officers coming out of the academy are trained by certified field training officers, where they collect reports and they document the progress, and they have to give updates on what they see and what they're training their recruits or new officers on? That's one thing. The other thing is, and again, I think most people know the FBI, especially now special agents, don't talk to the media. That's one of our policies. But I think sometimes we have to get the message out that there is other opportunities for people to have their issues resolved through the federal government, through the FBI. Okay, the FBI investigates hate crimes. A lot of times, even within, Marcus, this is the first time we've emailed each other, but we haven't met in person. But I'm always shocked that I get most of my cases from reading a newspaper, from finding out somebody just settled a $200,000 civil suit for excessive force, and I'm saying, like, this is the first time I'm ever hearing about it. So I think it's a challenge for law enforcement to kind of bring us into the arena to show their transparency and show their willingness to have others look at what occurred and hold possibly, because I mean, we don't get it always right. We've seen that in the news lately. But we're an underutilized asset for the community. And I think if the community understands that we have statutes, federal statutes, I'm not beholden to the governor or to the Attorney General of New Jersey, so that part doesn't play a role in what we do. And I think we have two prosecutorial offices. We have the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey that can decide whether they want to prosecute a case, because the FBI doesn't decide that, we just investigate it. But we also have the Department of Justice in D.C., their civil rights section, that can also review it and come up with an opinion of whether they want to prosecute it. So you have some other avenues, and I'll just say one last avenue is the pattern or practice investigations that the Department of Justice does. I mean, Newark is under a consent decree right now, the Newark Police Department, and last year, they didn't have one officer discharge a weapon, not even accidentally. And I think if you read that 50-page report that the Department of Justice did on their policing, you will find that they had some serious issues. And you now see that people are actively trying to address those issues with training, with personnel, with equipment, with all kinds of issues, and it seems to be working. Okay, I'm not on that police department, so I can't tell, but it seems to be working. And I think people need to know that those are avenues for the community and for law enforcement, because police chiefs can ask for those investigations. They can ask for their department to be reviewed. And if their review comes back that they don't need to enter into a consent decree, I think that's just bolstering what they're doing as a police department. And you commented on Bordentown. I know Chief Pesh very well. And again, when police departments are getting it right, they should be the model. When they aren't, we have to call that out. And if it's that officers have to be arrested and tried, then that's what we should do. But we can't shy away that there is an issue. We wouldn't be having this forum if there was not a serious issue, not only in New Jersey, but across the country. And just one of the things Tom said about the academy, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't know if you're going to actually make that change, but I've been through two academies. One's a police academy, one an FBI academy. FBI academy, I don't remember ever getting hollered at, screamed at, anybody up in my face, anything like that. They treated us like professionals, right? They treated us like adults that were there to keep that job, go through the training, be successful, and go out and do our jobs. I've been through a police academy where every time somebody walked by, I had to stand and brace against a wall, and you know, I didn't sign up for the military. I signed up to protect and serve. So I think changing that dynamic, even with our police explorers, because I've been to speak at a couple police explorers, and that's where you bring young kids from the community that want to emulate and be police officers possibly, and they get screamed at. And I'm saying to myself, how is this the model for training future police officers? Don't you think they're going to go out and start screaming at people when they become police officers? So I think we just have to do better. And again, the FBI has a role to play in that. And we can play a bigger role and be very independent about it if we're given the opportunity to. So I just, suggest that, people call us. We have a community outreach aspect that we go around. We did a training on color of law. That's what we call excessive force or sexual abuse cases involving police officers. We did one in Burlington County at the Burlington County Training Center. We're going to try to do a hate crimes forum here in the Mount Laurel area and possibly here if we can get this venue. So just put a plug out for that. But please look into that. The Department of Justice has a lot of different aspects that we can offer to the community and to local law enforcement. Thank you.
I'll be quick. Yes, that's the answer to your question.
Sure.
And if you leave me your card, I could probably help you get the venue, just saying.
We're short on time. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question because the special agent brought it up, Marcus brought it up. Chief Pesh, forgive me if I mispronounced your last name. That has been this has been an oft-repeated theme that when police officers go bad, you don't really hear anything. I remember covering Freddie Gray in Baltimore, that whole situation. The police union, front and center, said we don't like bad cops. We want to rid them and keep the good cops in. But when the bad cops act up, it seems that actions don't line up. What are we missing? Is there something that we're not noticing, or is there something that could be done on the law enforcement and to magnify the fact that, hey, we want these bad apples out of our force. They're making us look bad.
Well, I do. Rich talked extensively about all the resources you have out there to find out this information. The Attorney General's office made it a mandate that each municipality, each police department, has to post major discipline information on their website, as well as their annual internal affairs statistics.
But to be fair, the police union spot that.
They may have, yes. When you become chief, they kick you out of the union, so I don't really have a say in that.
Fair.
But I can just tell you that that's a venue that you can go to for information. For, administrative investigations when you're trying to fire a police officer, I can tell you they're quite lengthy. And, there's a lot of minutia involved. There's attorneys, there's solicitors. It's not in the police chief's best interest to speak out about a case of that nature before it's litigated and resolved. A criminal matter is a lot easier, okay? If one of your officers gets charged with a crime, if you're allowed to speak out, if you're not walled off by the Attorney General's office, which I think, since we have some media in the room, it's important that the media realizes that there are these rules in place, and to kind of attribute a no comment to the police chief, or if he's unavailable and he failed to return my call, sometimes we're not allowed to comment. So I think it's important that the media in the room educates themselves on what we are and are not allowed to talk about, because the last thing you want to do is cross the AG's office. That's not in your career best interest by giving a statement about an officer-involved shooting or some police-involved death. We're not allowed to talk about that because that's an independent investigation that they conduct. So we do have our limitations about what we can talk about, but if one of our officers is charged with a crime, I think, I know I would widely denounce that behavior, and you would get a statement from me. And for the more mundane stuff that happens every day, go to your municipality's website, look up their internal affairs statistics for the last year and their major discipline report that is posted on their website.
All right, next.
Yes, good evening. My name is Calvin Evans. I'm a retired DEA special agent out of the Philadelphia office, and I was in the Camden resident office, which is in Mount Laurel. I want to touch on what the gentleman was saying, but the bottom line is it's based on race, black and white. When it comes to police training, a lot of times the police officers who are being trained, their attitude comes in to the academy that it's enhanced by the trainer. If they're racist, their attitude is enhanced. Then that goes out on the street. As far as the military style, what the gentleman from the FBI said, I can scream in your face all day. That doesn't matter. All right? To me, that does not matter. That instills discipline. If you treat people fair, you're going to treat everybody the same. And the people who are being mistreated are people that resemble me. At times when I went to work from where I live to Maple Shade, New Jersey, unnecessarily stopped in a 2009 equal knot by at least 4 police departments. I think that one day I made all South Jersey. I've been carrying a badge with DEA for 30 years, 2.5 years at the local level in Montgomery County, Maryland, where they use the N-word on the radio at a regular basis. So I know from both sides. And I hear when gentlemen saying, take a ride along, how the public look at you. Well, they're looking at you for a reason. And the reason why is how things are being done collectively throughout the nation as far as law enforcement. People generally right now don't trust law enforcement. Until you realize that, like you said, we can have these forums all day. You can boast about your programs, handing out food, community relation. Till you realize that it's based on black and white, things are always going to happen. Touch on what the gentleman saying, that growing up, I too had to tell my son about putting his hands on the wheel. But we all know sometimes that don't work. I had problems on the job going to work while I was engaged on the street. And sometimes I had to not trust some of my coworkers because of their mentality. Racism is real. That incident in Mount Laurel involving that racist individual who terrorized his neighborhood, when you look at the video and the officer who originally showed up and he addressed him in some form of a cuss word, yes, he had that police officer in his pocket as far as the community, how they felt. That could have been escalated if he had been taken out of that neighborhood. But the community came together, and that initiated charges against that gentleman, if you want to call him that. And then 2 months later, there was another incident in Mount Laurel, but by the way, I also know that Mount Laurel has been a sundown town. That means people like us get out of Dodge before the lights turn out. But there was a woman who was allowed to exercise her white privilege, who was released in the custody, a grown woman being released in the custody of her friends, because the police officer did not believe the young black gentleman or what he said or how she attacked him. So I say training, and not just a makeshift training, thorough training of attitudes. Not all black people are looking to hurt you. Not all black men of size, and I'm not of size, but I have a lot of close friends who are of size, and I worry about them. When you sign the dotted line to be a police officer, you didn't sign it that you can freely pull out your gun just on certain people. Because historically, the United States have always been somewhat of a bully nation. Like they're bullying people on the border, Haitians, people that's trying to escape impunity, hardship. And what are they doing? Old school horseback, which historically a horse has always been used as an enforcer, although the American natives use that against the Europeans. And whips. Now, I've been handing out a lot of equipment, a gun, right, a baton, but maybe I missed the whip. I guess DEA didn't want us whipping drug dealers. Not saying I was going to do that anyway. I would suggest law enforcement thoroughly rethink their training. I too, like the gentleman from the Bureau, been through 2 academies. And what's different being a cadet in both academies than my white cadet. Much different. Because white privilege is strong. White privilege is strong. So when you decide to sign that contract to be a police officer, you got to realize that a lot of things are going to happen. But the key thing is treat everybody fair. Because when you don't, on the average, a white defendant is going to be the first to pull the trigger and kill a white officer. Why? Because that white officer, on the average, underestimates him because he thinks he's not. And if we want to turn our back on January the 6th, that's a rude awakening. Because we all know people of color, if they committed that insurrection, you would have to get morticians to come out of retirement to fill the coffins. White privilege was exercised. Those police officers allowed them to waltz in. They did whatever they wanted to do. So no matter what you say, that was based on race. And you got to look at it that way. It's based on race. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And for those in the room who don't, he mentioned a video of the other Mount Laurel incident. It just happened to be my story. Woman who's not even from Mount Laurel wandered into the wrong hotel, called the clerk an N-word, and just threw stuff at the clerk. The family member took him to the hotel that she actually was supposed to be at. Update, she's in jail last I checked. She's been charged, but that was the other incident. Let me get...
Real quick question, sir?
Yeah.
Were the police alleged to have done anything improper in that incident that you just talked about?
I don't recall.
Okay.
But,
They weren't, as far as I know.
well, whyy.org/NJ. The story's on there. Final question.
Good evening. I'm one of Professor Rizzo's students. This question is geared more towards the journalists. And forgive me, I do not know much about like how a story gets through. Do you feel that there is a cut between those who are out there capturing the moment and those in charge of the publishing, the editing process, other departments? And how much is filtered, gets lost in the process? How do you preserve the accuracy and avoid bias? Is it also about engaging, exciting the readers? Because I know certain words can be charged as well as photos can purposely evoke certain reactions, emotions, outrage. How do you ensure that readers are also getting the bigger picture, not something that can lead to misinterpretation?
Ooh, that's a lot.
That was a lot. I apologize.
Yeah. Okay. It's the last part of it is really tough to ensure that readers get the full picture, and you got to sort of count on them being really intelligent and getting the nuances, and they don't always. And I think more and more, like we talked about, you know, people go to Fox News or MSNBC and they go and they pick out what they want. And that's just something that's been hard for me to accept over the years, but it happens. In terms of the other stuff, yeah, like it's been hard with editors. I mean, I was at the Inquirer for 34 years until now that I'm freelancing and just covering Camden, and it would be tough to get through to some of my editors. I mean, it was golden when you found an editor that really understood what you were trying to say, and things do get lost, and it's tough to deal with. Weirdly, I have a Facebook page called Camden, New Jersey, A Spirit Invincible. I have like 22,000 followers, and if I can't get something out through a media outlet, I put it out there. And there was something sort of liberating about that and cutting out the middleman, and that I could just be responsive to the community and put things on my page and report them and take questions from people and get their, you know, and not have this editor who had their own biases and who wasn't there. You know, editors have preconceived ideas. They send you out on a story. They have a picture in their head of what you're going to bring back, and sometimes it's hard for them to alter that. Melanie? But you ask really good questions, and we wrestle with those all the time.
Yeah, I would just add that you have to understand that we can't control the narrative all the time, but there are times, and I'll just speak for me, when I'm passionate about a story, I will fight for that story until the bitter end. And there have been times when I've actually said, take my byline off of that story if the editing does not reflect me. And if you read a reporter or a writer regularly, you know their voice. And I'll give you an example. I wrote a story about the shooting in Trenton. Remember the arts festival and a young man was killed? Right. And so I wrote that the young man was shot and killed by police, which was not in dispute. The only question was whether or not the use of force was justified. And in the translation, my editor wrote that he was felled by the officer's bullet. And I said, absolutely not. First of all, my friends and family will revoke my black card if they read that I wrote that a black man was felled by the police when he was shot and killed by the police. So, you know, there are times when we can pick and choose our battles, stories that we're passionate about, that we won't back down, and sometimes we don't always win. But I think that I win more often than I lose.
I just want to say one other thing. In 2006, I did a column for the Inquirer on every kid under 18 who was shot and killed in Philadelphia. There were only 24 kids that year. But one of the editors, when I was going to do the column, his first question was, how are you going to show which kids are innocent and which kids were really guilty? I was like, really? Like, that's, like, somebody deserved that? I mean, come on. You know, so, I mean, that's kind of, you know, you deal with that in the newsroom, and it's really frustrating when that happens.
I'm going to add something from the Society of Professional Journalists. Amplifying on something Melanie said, I think, an hour and 10 minutes ago. This has gone on for a little while. But I think you have some very, very good reporters here tonight, but the antidote for bad journalism, the antidote for just journalism of the moment, the antidote for bad journalism is more journalism. That may seem counterintuitive. If you just saw one of Melanie's stories, check out, the Inquirer has a page of stories by Melanie Burney, and you'll say, oh, she followed up on that. But here's something. I have to read newspapers from around the state, and I'm a volunteer, and I'm stunned lately in that for 99 cents for the first 3 months, you can read everything in so many newspapers. Be careful about that 4th month because they'll slam you. But 99 cents for 3 months, and when you've done it, subscribe, go from the Record to the Ledger to wherever. And even in looking up the racist rant, I used up all my stories I'm allowed to read on the Inquirer. I did subscribe, but all right, now I have to get my news from somewhere else. And there's that perspective on it. So a lot of it is on journalists, and the good ones fight the fight and say, yeah, I'll work today even though it's a holiday weekend, it's my day off because the story demands it. But some of it's on you. Do what the FBI does. Read a lot of newspapers. Find out what's going on. Read different ones. Yeah. And as somebody who produced Live at 5 for WNBC and Channel 2 News at 11, we also get our stories from reading the newspapers. So, and that's something that's available to you. And just while I have the mic.
WHYY has no paywall.
That's right.
We will, on our website, the New Jersey Society of Professional Journalists, we will post some links to what people here are saying tonight. Not tomorrow, because we're all volunteers, but give us about a week. njspj.org. We're videoing this. We're going to try to get that up. Again, you got to give us a little time. I know that people here are going to submit some links that they want you to click on so you can follow up. I mean, we've gone late, and I think it's fascinating. I think we have a great group here. I'm sorry, Kenny, I'm going to let you finish.
No problem. Blake? No. I mean, we've been here all. Well, and actually, I forgot I had the internet up here, and I looked up the article. But instead of doing reading time with Kenny, I'm just going to sum it up like this. This is just the tip of the iceberg between all the different entities you see on stage. I think Buzz said a good point that at the end, we're born human. We weren't always journalists or community leaders or academics or law enforcement officers. We are human. And had we had a little bit more time, I would have reworded the question and said, tell people who you are. I would have said, Bud, who are you? Don't tell me your job or your silo. Who are you outside of the job? But all that to say, this is just the tip of the iceberg because there are nuances that we didn't cover, and we touched on them, there's stuff that police chiefs can and can't do. There's ethics that we can't do as journalists. There's stuff that community leaders can and can't do just out of basic decency and integrity. And there's the same with academics. And hopefully we'll be able to touch on this in Newark next month. I'm definitely going to make the road trip up from Central Jersey.
Pick me up.
You have to pass by me, though. I'm in Trenton. But thank you all. I know it's been a long night. It's been 2.5 hours now. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Bob and everybody at NJSPJ for the opportunity. And thanks for taking some of my bad jokes, because again, we're human, and this is a tough, hard conversation to have. But I just felt that we needed to remember at the end of the day, we are human. We're not trying to attack each other. we're having a passionate conversation that could have gone the other way, and I thank you guys that it didn't go that way. So I applaud you, and I applaud everybody in the room. Good night.